Has the idea of law enforcement in America changed much since 1850? European colonies established this in the 16th century, in the West Indies, later to be adapted in American colonies in the 18th century, colonial Virginia and Carolina. The colonial era of the United States saw the emergence of a law enforcement system modeled on those present in Europe. In the northern colonies, these consisted of watchmen, employed by private citizens to police the streets and maintain order. In the southern colonies, law enforcement was primarily centered around policing the large population of enslaved African Americans who worked on plantations. These groups consisted of both planters and colonists who owned no slaves and were paid by planters to search for escaped slaves. These Southern law enforcement groups, which continued to be active after the American Revolution and the establishment of the United States, were created out of a need to maintain order among the enslaved and enslaved owners as opposed to protecting the interests of the colonists who owned no slaves. Many Southern planters were considered irresponsible if their enslaved chattel property were allowed to escape. It was a fear that more escapes would upend the system if not met with an immediate response.
Please don't shoot me, please, man.
I'm not gonna shoot you. Step on, face away.
I'm gonna get out of here, man. Please don't shoot me, man.
Don't shoot me, man.
Please, man. I just lost my mom, man.
It was believed to be in the general interest of all planters to maintain discipline to ensure the enslaved did not have the chance to start a rebellion. Many states allowed local law enforcement to enlist the help of federal marshals, U.S. commissioners, and other local citizens. This spread to more states with the ratification of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which required all citizens and local law enforcement to aid in the capture of runaway slaves. This was less than 2 generations ago, 174 years. To nullify this practice, local government began offering law enforcement agents a greater reward for returning a slave to the South than that of abolitionists who were willing to pay police to look the other way. During the Civil War, these law enforcement groups were met with great difficulty, primarily because most of the white men were off fighting in the war. With the men gone, the duty to keep the enslaved in line fell on the women, who also had households to run. The lack of punishment and a greater likelihood of successful escape caused more and more of the enslaved to run away. With slave patrols stretched so thin, many of the enslaved were able to escape and were often aided by enemy invaders.
I was counting down my breaths, my blinks, because I was just staring right at the sky, watching the clouds. I'm just like, God, I'm coming. I guess this is it for me.
Many of the enslaved joined Union ranks, the United States colored troops, taking up arms against their former owners. Revisiting American history does not seem like a distant endeavor. This feels current in some instances, with religion and politics staying on code.
No, there isn't a quota. In fact, it's actually illegal to have a quota. However, there are ways that departments get around this. And a good example of that is we have an award called Hard Charger. Now this Hard Charger award is for the person who basically has the most stats. Now if I'm a new officer and I want to win that award, what do you think I'm going to do? I'm going to go out there and hammer everything. I'm going to go out there and write a ton of tickets, and some of those tickets are probably going to be BS stuff like writing somebody for a tag light, but because I want to reach those stat limits, I'm going to do it. Or I'm going to make every arrest I possibly can, even if it's a minor one, even though I legally can to make an arrest. Is it necessary? Not always, right? We have discretion in some cases, but if you're trying to go for a hard charger, you're probably going to push for that arrest. It's an award that I don't entirely agree with, and I think it causes some people to push a little too far. Too much tickets for ridiculous things because they just want to win an award. Who cares about an award? Just do your job. So, no, legally, you cannot have a quota. However, departments do find ways around it.
The US prides itself on its freedoms. I don't know how many times I was told growing up that America is the land of the free and the home of the brave, and I should be willing to die for that freedom. As you can imagine, I just kind of believed it because I didn't know better, and why would they lie about that? Well, I can tell you my opinion has definitely changed since traveling and living abroad. It turns out the US isn't even in the top 10 freest countries according to the Human Freedom Index. It is in the top 20, ranked at 15, but the way the media and government talk about freedom in the US makes it sound like all other countries are imprisoning their people and forcing them to work, which is kind of ironic because the US actually ranks number 1 in incarcerated people. According to World Prison Brief, the United States leads the world in total number of people incarcerated, with more than 2 million prisoners nationwide. My views have definitely changed on the US being the freest country in the world. It is very interesting to talk with people who are not from the US and who haven't grown up with gun ownership being a common and real thing. Growing up in the US, it was normal to own guns, and many people I knew had guns. I remember my brother having a shotgun in his house, and I didn't think it was that strange or weird. But this isn't normal globally, and actually only 3 countries have constitutional rights to own a gun. While most countries allow gun ownership, they impose strict laws regulating which types of guns you can own and how they are stored. According to Insider, Americans own nearly half of all the civilian-owned guns in the world, and on a per capita basis, the US has far more guns than any other nation.
Private prisons are government contractors. There's a bed guarantee, where the government guarantees private prison companies over 90% occupancy in a contract. The contract states that if 90% of occupancy is not fulfilled, the company must pay a fee. Citizens are punished when they commit crimes, and the government is penalized if they don't. Private prisons make their money either way. Prisons profit $74 billion a year. How can the government be sure that so many people will commit crimes? In the US, single mothers run 70% to 80% of households. In addition, 70% to 80% of inmates come from single mother families.
Don't pull it out!
Is it a coincidence that mothers are awarded custody of their children 90% of the time? I think not. Is single motherhood assisting the government in keeping its part of the contract? The key to keeping our kids out of prison is the father.
If your IQ is too high, you're no good for the police department, because our research says you're not going to be challenged with this job, and you're more likely to be involved in corruption. Be a cop. The way I look at it, you got to be brainwashable. You got to be somebody who we can track the way you think. You got to be malleable. We got to turn you into what we want to turn you into. And so upon learning that, I go, they don't think out of the box. They're from the box. I'm not saying every officer, because there's a lot of officers, that come with a modicum of common sense and fair play. But you got a lot of nerds who now get bigger, and now they want it to be powerful, and they want to exude that power.